Good morning. Today's Thursday, May 14th, and it's almost over. We only have one more day. Okay, so your objective for the day is I will complete a guided reading to demonstrate my comprehension of the Civil War in the East, and then how Lee tries to invade Maryland, and the Emancipation Proclamation. Let's review from yesterday. So yesterday, when you were reading the material, you should have realized that it makes sense that the very first battle, the first battle of Bull Run, or some people call it the first battle of Manassas, because it was closest to that town, Manassas, Virginia, that it would have taken place there, because Manassas is as you come over the bridge over the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., which is where the Union Army was. When you go over the bridge, you then are in Maryland. You're in Virginia. So it makes sense. Remember when you were reading yesterday about the First Battle of Bull Run, that it took place on July 21st, 1861. And the people in Washington, D.C. knew this battle was getting ready to take place because the Union Army was prepping to leave, and they knew which way they were going. So they brought their wagon trains, and they went over with their little wagons and their horse and their children and their picnic lunch. And there were hundreds of spectators that wanted to watch this battle. And we know that as the battle began, both sides were green. They'd never been in battle together before. And at first, the Union Army was winning. And the rebels, or the Confederate Army, they were retreating. And then a guy named Jackson, and we called him Stonewall Jackson after this, he said, "Hold your ground." And he got the rebels to hold their ground, and then they started attacking and going on the offensive towards the Union. And the Union Army broke up. They started running away. And they decided they were running back to Washington, D.C. So all those spectators were in the way. And Union Army were running over them. They were getting trampled. It was just panic set in. It was terrible. So as you can see, that would be a Confederate win. Okay. So the next thing that you read about was the control of the West. And the reason the Union wanted to control the West is they wanted the Mississippi River. Because if you can control the Mississippi River, you can control the traffic of goods in and out of the Confederate States. Because remember, 2/3 of the railroads were in the North. The industry was in the North. Most of the roads were in the North. The South used waterways, and specifically the Mississippi River and the tributaries, to get things in and out of the South. And then, of course, the South was on the Gulf and on the Atlantic Ocean, so they used the oceans too in the Gulf. But if you can stop them from using waterways, they have no way to get new supplies in, and they don't have any industrialization, or very little. So it was really hard to get ammunition and weapons and things that they were going to need for the war if they couldn't import them. And how do they get money? They export their cotton and their indigo and their tobacco. Well, remember, the U.S. or the Union blockaded to keep the South from getting things in and out. So now if we stop the Mississippi River, they're going to be really locked down and hard to get things in and out. Okay. Then you read about the ironclads. So the first one to come up with the ironclad, or putting metal on the outside of the boat, was the South. And they named their ironclad the Virginia. The North, after they were attacking Northern ships, and our Northern ships were, cannonballing, and it just hit the metal and came off and didn't do any damage, the North went, "Oh, we should probably get one too." So they did the same thing. They retrofitted and made a boat into an ironclad, and they called it the Monitor. And so when the Monitor and the Virginia went to battle against each other, they just, boom, there would be one cannonball and then another cannonball, and they would just hit and come off. They would roll it off. So in the end, neither one of the ships won. So then they just both went away. Okay. the next thing you guys read about was the Battle of Shiloh. And the reason it's called the Battle of Shiloh is because the closest geographic item there was the Shiloh Church. Some people call it the Battle of Corinth, Mississippi, because it took place close to Corinth, Mississippi. And on this one, it was a bloody 2 days. In 2 days, 23,000 casualties. And casualties, remember, are dead or wounded. Very, very bloody 2 days of battle. Eventually, the Union wins, and this helps them take over the Mississippi River. Now, to complete their attack and take over the Mississippi River, they need the mouth of the Mississippi, which is in New Orleans, Louisiana. So, right after Shiloh, they send Admiral Farragut, as in Admiral Farragut School over in St. Pete. But anyway, they send Admiral Farragut over, and he takes New Orleans. And at that point, the Confederacy is shut off from using the Mississippi River. Okay. So today, we're going to learn about the wars in the east side. Okay. Now, it makes sense that most of the war would be in the south and the east, so the southeast. So there were a lot of battles in Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia. Today, we'll have a couple battles that go into Maryland, but most of the things were always in the south. Because remember, this was offensive. It was the North invading the South. And the South, all they had to do was hold their ground. So they were playing defense, so they stayed mostly in the South. Okay. At the beginning, the Confederates, with Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson, did really well. And they were winning quite a few battles. Especially in Virginia. So some of the ones that you will need to know today are the 7 Days Battle, the Second Battle of Bull Run, and Fredericksburg. Another one would be in Chancellorsville, Virginia. And at that point, when they had this string of victories, Lincoln was getting worried. And he had made this guy named McClellan his general, his head. He was terrible. And the issue with George McClellan was that he was indecisive. So every time we would have the Confederacy on the run, he would wait and not act. If he'd acted decisively and could make a decision, for instance, we would have won many battles. I mean, we knew what was going on and what the plan was because we found their information on one battle, and he still didn't do anything for 2 days. So eventually McClellan's going to get fired because he's terrible. And the funny part is he runs for president after that. Okay, so then Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, he's like, hey, Lee, Robert E. Lee, you need to go in and let's show some force. Go and invade Maryland. So he does. But things do not go well for them. Okay, so the first battle is the Battle of Antietam. And Robert E. Lee had this idea. He was going to split his forces into four, and then they were going to attack from different sides. Well, one of his officers had this plan in his backpack, in his pocket, whatever, and it falls out. The Union Army finds it. And instead of McClellan immediately going and attacking and taking care of it, because they now know what's going on, he waits 2 days, which gives Lee time to get his stuff together. And that's why the Battle of Antietam is such a terrible battle. It's a 1-day battle, and it's in Maryland, and 23,000 casualties, 6,000 dead, 17,000 wounded. 23,000 casualties in 1 day. So that is the bloodiest day in American history. Everyone knows, if you talk to anyone about Civil War, they all know that one. The bloodiest day was Antietam, and it was 23,000. And that was September of 1862. And it's outside of Sharpsburg, Maryland. the next thing you're going to read about in 469 today is the Emancipation Proclamation. So, remember how I told you the South was trying to get Great Britain and France to help them, but they both had banned slavery? So, although Lincoln hated slavery and didn't think it should ever happen, it should be abolished, he wasn't willing to make the war about that. That was not his idea. He just wanted to bring the South back into the Union and make us a full country again. And he didn't want to make the border states angry because that would add additional states right there surrounding the Washington, D.C. Against us. So that's why, that was some of the reasons he didn't free the slaves. But so to get Great Britain and France not to help the South, they're like, oh, let's come up with this. They came up with an idea. It's called the Emancipation Proclamation. And what it is on September 22nd, 1862, they came up with this idea that he couldn't take and free everybody, not constitutionally at this point, but he could take the property of people we are at war with, the enemy of who we are at war with. So the Emancipation Proclamation actually says that all slaves living in the Confederacy, the states who had left the Union, were free. Now, that did not free any slaves in the border states. They all kept their slaves. It was only in the areas that we didn't even control anymore. But that made Great Britain and France not help the Confederacy. And eventually, this helped us for a few reasons. One was, as our Union troops walked through the South, they would read the Emancipation Proclamation on plantations, and many of the slaves would go, "We're free? Yep, you're free," and they would just walk away. Now, if the slaves are walking away and they're not staying there on their plantation and working, guess what? No work's getting done. So now we're going to hurt them economically again. So anyway, it ends up working out well for us. And that's last from today. So you have another worksheet today. Make sure that you're reading and checking your answers as you're reading, and make sure they work. Because you guys put some answers out yesterday that were they didn't work. It was looking for a noun, you guys put a verb. So make sure that what your answer is, make it make sense. Okay, we only have Friday left this week. Yay! Last thing I want to talk about is the story. Okay, so remember the first Bull Run, or Manassas, whatever you want to call it, the Battle of Manassas. Okay, so that guy is really funny. He owned the land that the first battle was on. So it's right over the border. So he knows there's going to be more than one battle there. So he's like, this is not safe for my family. I'm going to move them. So he ends up moving them to another part of Virginia. And we'll talk about where he moves them, because remember, the war starts in his front yard. And he's going to have a real important part at the end. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.